Have you ever picked up a game that you really enjoyed, but for whatever reason had to put it down for an extended period? Then, as the days went by, new games released, life continued forward with less and less time available to allot to pleasant entertainment. You realized that years had passed and you'd never managed to actually roll credits. That has been my 2.5-decade-long experience with the .hack series, specifically the game series starting with .hack Infection. Having been a major fan of the .hack Sign anime when it first arrived in America, the 11-year-old Prakuza was ecstatic to see that not only did the gaming-centric show get a video game adaptation, but it was a dungeon crawler with a complex battle system and compelling narrative that held up well against contemporary RPGs of the early 2000s. Now, 20 years later, the .hack series has grown into a massive multimedia franchise with multiple manga series, many of which have received anime adaptations of their own, and 2 successful and popular video game series. Howdy, I'm Prakuza, and welcome to DevBox, where today I want to dive into a game series that I never managed to finish back in its heyday. The 4-volume set of games including .hack Infection, Mutation, Outbreak, and Quarantine, referred to nominally by its still active fanbase as .hack IMOQ. So let's give this iconic multimedia series some retro respect. Side note, this is the first of many games I want to cover on Retro Respect that I'll be referring to as a RECO, which stands for Retro I Couldn't Overcome. A completely natural title that came from the normal way I speak, and definitely wasn't me wanting an acronym and working backwards from there. This one is an acronym for Pacification Automaton X. Almost feels like they had the acronym first and worked their way backwards from there. Like some kind of hack. Technically, Evergrace would retroactively be my first RECO, but I wanted to actually give these specific videos their own moniker in order to incentivize me to explore stuff I hadn't finished in the past. And it definitely wasn't to make sure that when you type in DevBox RECO into Google, you get these videos as your top search result. Totally not that. And on an unrelated note, this video is sponsored by DevCoin, the number 10 Bitcoin on the Ether blockchain. That stuff all made sense, right? I don't know crypto. So to start, let's go over the relevant history of Project.hack. In this case, by relevant, I mean the original .hack Sign anime that aired from April 2002 until September of the same year. While I'll note here that the franchise has also extended to include entries like .hack Roots, Legend of the Twilight Bracelet, and Quantum, .hack Sign and one additional OVA will be the only material that we need to discuss for understanding IMOQ. .hack Sign was a revolutionary anime coming at a time when VR was still the distant future prospect of gaming, with most of the examples of VR at the time being complete failures, like the Nintendo Virtual Boy. Although, when looking at the depiction of the VR headset from the anime, you can already see how surprisingly prophetic Project.hack was, as it looks nearly identical to modern VR headsets, complete with a 3-point strap that wraps around and over the head. Considering that the series was originally conceptualized by popular gaming publisher Bandai and developer CyberConnect 2, it makes plenty of sense that the creators would have a pretty good idea of the modern, at the time, and future state of gaming. Although for many of my younger viewers, you might only really know .hack Sign and related media, as the old show some unk claims to be the superior precursor to Sword Art Online. I mean, it is, but that doesn't mean SAO is bad. Fun Prakuza fact, while a lot of people tend to assume that the primary inspiration from my first book, Level 1, was Sword Art Online, it's actually more inspired by the .hack series, the Sign anime and IMOQ game series specifically, with a touch of Dark Souls naturally. Hell, there's even a direct reference to the Armored Warrior from Sekiro in there. Though the first media to release for Project.hack was Sign, the series was originally conceived as a video game. This would eventually take shape in the form of .hack Infection, the first of 4 volumes in the game series that would act as a direct sequel to Sign. These 4 volumes would release over the course of a year, starting with .hack Infection releasing on June 20th, 2002 in Japan. A follow-up would quickly release in September of 2002 with the second volume, .hack Mutation. Then Volume 3, .hack Outbreak, would release December of 2002, before the fourth and final volume, .hack Quarantine, would release in April of 2003. The North American release window would stretch from February 2003 to January of 2004, and the PAL region's localization would start in March of 2004 and finish in December of the same year. However, while this extremely fast turnaround originally meant that fans wouldn't have to wait too long for each new volume, the games didn't exactly elevate their own gameplay from one entry to the next. Volume 1 would introduce Kite and the core concept of the series moving forward, including the dungeon crawling gameplay as well as the bracelet, which would be a major story and gameplay feature for all 4 volumes. Volume 2 would introduce the feature where Kite will be able to load into each subsequent game using their original file. This volume would also update the level cap, give access to a new server and root town with new grunties, and introduce some more companions to be met and recruited. By Volume 3, the formula was clear, and we've come to the more of the same portion. New level cap, new grunties, new companions, etc. Not to diminish the story impact and fun of the game, but innovations are lacking at this point. It's simply the next part of the story before the finale. Then Volume 4 would end the original series. The lack of innovation from Volumes 1 through 4 led to diminishing reviews and a decent dose of apathy from fans. This also appears to have had a direct impression on how many of each volume was printed. In fact, while there are always copies of Quarantine to be found on resale markets, it has become one of the most expensive games currently circulating in the retro gaming market, which is the real reason why this video is being made. Because while we were kids, my brother had originally bought the first game at launch, our family would not get the remaining 3 over the course of its year of release. And being a middle schooler at the time, I couldn't exactly afford to buy 3 more $40 to $50 games for myself in that time period. So it wasn't until much later that I started to pick up the rest of the series, and by then, Quarantine had become prohibitively expensive. And that is the reason why this series has dropped well into the realm of a Rico, as a result of that price, which has only gotten worse since, with the final game in the series now reselling for upwards of $350. And considering that I'm still broke as fuck, this is why I will be emulating. Even though I generally suggest that folks look for an official release or modern remaster of these games that I cover if they want to support the current IP holder and possibly revive interest in these long dead series I talk about. But there is no way to support Bandai or CyberConnect 2 with this specific series. So for now, we're working with what we've got. Bundled with the games was also .hack Liminality, a 4-part OVA that clocks in at about 2 hours of total animated footage. This show is much more in tandem with the games than .hack Sign, but is not a required read in order to understand the story being told within the game universe itself. It should also be noted that anyone looking for the physical copies of the games like I was back when I first played the series, resellers tend to separate the OVA discs from the game discs, and so while tracking down copies of the games themselves can already be an expensive hassle, making sure to get Liminality alongside the games is a tough ask these days. Unless of course you're looking to drop like $1,000 on the complete series all at once. And with the state of emulation as it is today, I wouldn't even suggest going physical at all if you're not a die-hard physical games media collector. The games are fun and absolutely worth playing, and the OVA is very interesting and artfully made, but not really worth that kind of money on that merit alone. .hack IMOQ would then be followed by another series, a trilogy called .hack GU. However, I will not be diving into GU in this video, or the related anime .hack Roots, because the video will already be long enough without spending extra time focusing on a completely disconnected sequel series. GU is also very much its own thing and doesn't continue the collective save progress function that the IMOQ series uses, although there is a minor benefit to having IMOQ save data when first booting up GU. For now though, this ends our history lesson and we can start talking presentation. Visually, the IMOQ games follow the style often set by the subset of RPGs from Japan that really lean into anime aesthetics. With artwork made by Yoshiyuki Sadamoto, who himself is best known for his work as an artist and character designer for the Neon Genesis Evangelion series, Sadamoto also has a decent amount of baggage on his career that some fans of his works might already be aware of. While I really don't have the time nor the authority to pass judgment here, criticisms of the artist are publicly known, and feel free to come to whatever conclusions about him that you want if you decide to dive into that. This style obviously draws a quick connection to the dot hack sign anime, as does having several dot hack sign characters make appearances in the games. Again, Dot Hack Infection would act as a sequel to that original anime, and the protagonists of the games would even appear in the finale of Dot Hack Sign. So for the visual design, think more Star Ocean, less Final Fantasy. Vibrant colors and oddly designed clothes are the name of the game, mimicking RPG armor of the time. Honestly, some of these would even fit right in with a modern Monster Hunter. Black Rose would be more akin to Black Desert Online, though. We also get a rare few occasions with some minor animations, and eventually some very well animated action scenes. But these are extremely limited, so don't go expecting studio-triggered levels of crazy action for the entire run of the games. As for the design of the in-game world itself, locations are generally divided into 3 groups, all consisting of explorable 3D environments. First, there's root towns, small locations with shops and other characters to talk to and trade items with. These talk options, however, are extremely minor and really only amount to a single sentence from each NPC that is either a tutorial from shop owners, flavor text from party members, or trade requirements from other NPCs that can be found running around these locations. Towns also hold the Chaos Gate, which sends Kite to the combat environments. Next, we have overworld maps, the various worlds that Kite will visit in order to engage with combat, find new items, and follow story beats. The overworld maps come in various types decided by the strings of keywords used at the Chaos Gate to access them. This whole system is not unlike the Bloodborne Chalice dungeons, which is to say that they are procedurally generated using a handful of pre-made assets. But the result is that each area comes out appearing very similar to any others with the same style choices. These areas are generally open landscapes with several hills and random objects spawning at the edge of the draw distance. While the draw distance is obvious, the way that the system draws those assets is very natural without using an ethereal fog or anything to hide that space. Finally, we have dungeons. Part of most overworld maps, dungeons are multi-floored, multi-roomed areas filled with enemies, treasures, and challenges. Most of these dungeons are between 2 and 5 floors deep. At the bottom of each dungeon is a special chest and a god statue. Dungeons also come in 4 variants: cave, stone, castle, and flesh. Yes, cave and stone sound similar, but once you've been in them, you'll immediately recognize where you are as you explore. These are also determined by the keywords used in the Chaos Gate. The visual design for these 3 types of locations are all incredible, with unique styles for each town, from elevated mountain shrines to classical seaside cities. This also goes for the overworld and dungeon maps. Each area is brightly colored with interesting landmarks that don't really create a lived-in or natural environment, but still an incredibly artful one. None of this feels like a place where people currently live or ever lived in the past, but they aren't really going for that. Everything is supposed to feel disconnected from the real world, and like we're inside of a video game, because we literally are. See, all of these towns and dungeons are found in The World, the game that the Dot Hack series is centered around, and we only really get to perceive what is happening through this in-game game, as the only times we spend outside of the game world itself is spent on a desktop, looking through emails, news, and a message board that acts like an old-school gaming forum. Moving on from the visuals and onto the sound design, the music is also incredible. At least, a lot of the songs are great, especially the music inside of dungeons. My favorite dungeon track is the Castle Dungeon theme, which has a real Shimomura style to it, which is to say, it sounds like Kingdom Hearts. .hack IMOQ's music is composed by Chikayo Fukuda, the primary composer for most of CyberConnect 2's games, which has also included several anime tie-in games apart from the .hack series, like the Naruto Ultimate Ninja Storm series. It's hard to describe exactly what makes the music of .hack IMOQ so impactful from game to game, but the music is that perfect balance of not being very intrusive, which is great because the game is going to be getting repetitive very fast, and it is a bold task to try keeping the music from adding to the monotonous feeling of repeating dungeons over and over, which leads perfectly into our next topic. So, the gameplay of the .hack IMOQ series breaks down into three main segments. Although the vast majority of the gameplay experience is spent in combat, diving into dungeons, we'll start in-game with the town exploration and various mini-games. So the main activities in town are shopping and item trading, basically talking to NPCs and trading items found in dungeons for gear the NPCs are willing to give up. Usually it's pretty strong stuff, and on first arriving to each server, trading for new weapons and armor can be a great way to quickly jump up in power. Aside from trading, the other major activity in towns is either grunty raising or eventually racing, starting in .hack Mutation. Raising grunties involves feeding them the food that we find around locations and in dungeons. There's a complex management of grunty stats to figure out which grunty you'll get, or you can follow a guide, or you can listen to what the grunty is asking for and always feed them one of those on repeat. Each new server town, which you unlock one per game, offers 2 new grunties that can be earned by making good on those stats, and then the noble grunty you get for failing to moderate the stats correctly. Once we reach .hack Mutation, after raising all the grunties in a given town, you can then start grunty racing. And this little minigame is absolute bullshit, where you have to get your timing, turning, and control of the grunty absolutely perfect in order to win first prize. Honestly, I'd take the 0.0 Chocobo race from Final Fantasy X over these any day. And that's it. Like, yeah, there's plenty of interruptions in the regular gameplay loop, sending Kite back and forth between the world and his desktop to check the board, news, and email. This is the second main segment of the gameplay, but there isn't really much deviation from the loop of jumping into the dungeon crawl, then heading back up to the desktop to read a bunch of emails and board postings. Personally, I prefer when an RPG deviates from its ordinary game loop every once in a while to add a little texture to the canvas. Like, refilling presents and driving the gummy ship might be annoying to a lot of players in Kingdom Hearts 2, or dodging lightning in Final Fantasy X, but these little mini diversions stop games from feeling overly predictable, or like you're going through the motions by the end. And playing through all 4 of these games in sequence, it definitely needs some of that variety to keep it from feeling like those motions by the time we hit quarantine. Finally though, we arrive at combat. .hack IMOQ's combat system is a somewhat active action combat combined with the auto attack system most commonly found in MMOs. Basically, instead of setting Kite to an auto attack, then choosing skills to use throughout the fight, Kite needs to continually activate the attack manually, before pausing to menu through some skills and let the skills play out. At first, this means that a lot of fights wind up being a lot of slowly attacking while periodically stopping to deliver some extra high damage with a skill. But towards the end of the series, Kite will be spending most fights completely in menus, and the basic attack becomes more situational than an actual tool in the kit. Overall, combat also has 2 major enhancements that elevates it from completely mundane basic attacks. For one, attacks are split between physical and magical, with some enemies being especially vulnerable to one type over the other, and different characters being more capable of attacking with one over the other. This also leads into the party dynamic that can be freely adjusted by choosing different party members to fill out the 3-man teams that will be diving into each dungeon, with other characters taking on melee-focused classes like the Blade Master and Heavy Blade, or magic-focused classes like Wave Master. There are plenty of combinations of additional characters to take through the dungeon crawl that quickly become the key to overcoming these physical and magical weaknesses, as the other party members cover those bases as thoroughly as possible. And B, elemental attacks have a massive effect on opposing types, with the exploitation of elemental weaknesses being the key to successfully navigating most dungeons. These elements also make way for one of the more intricate designs about the combat, which is the magic system and its completely in-universe language. As Kite continues to explore more dungeons and finds more gear, he and his party will start to get access to more and more magic, all of which comes in one of various styles. There's elemental attack spells that deal elemental damage by either raising the element from the ground, dropping it from above, converging it from around the enemy, or finally creating a tornado of said element to attack in a slightly wider area. Then there's also the healing magic, buffing magic, and naturally debuffing magic. It's all very basic for RPG gameplay, but what I really enjoy about it is the ways that each spell is based on an in-universe language that denotes what the spell is going to be. For example, any spell that buffs a party member will be preceded by the word app, and a debuff will be deck. So the spells that give party members a speed boost is apto, or improve speed. But the opposite ability to cast slow on enemies is decto, or reduce speed. This same aspect of language goes for the elemental and even healing magic as well, meaning that learning the words for each element and each type of attack means that it is entirely possible to read the name of the spell and fully understand it without ever having to hover over it and see exactly what each spell does. Recognizing the components can be enough to understand the magic being given. It's a minor amount of utility added by the ability to memorize the language, which has plenty of room for improvement in terms of that utility by pulling from other titles like maybe Saga Frontier or the Ultima series, as it would be interesting to allow players to mix and match different words in the magical language at will to change Kite's available spells. However, what I'm most impressed with is the level of continuity in this spell language. It could have easily been replaced with Fire Tornado or Speed Boost, but creating this alternate language adds some much needed personality to the in-game world, and integrates it nicely with the combat experience. I love seeing this. Individual fights are only a piece of the overall struggle as well. At their core, the dot hack games are dungeon crawlers, which means that the actual challenge of the game comes less from each individual encounter and more about managing an inventory of items, health, and MP in order to survive through to the end of an elongated dungeon. So while spamming skills is a quick way to get through each individual fight, they can quickly drain on Kite's resources as they dive deeper into the dungeons. Then at the end of the story dungeons, we often get a boss fight, which aren't too different from a normal fight, but they're longer, for sure, and sometimes have a unique mechanic that Kite needs to stay on top of in order to not die. These bosses start extremely simple and get more impressive by the end of Mutation and continue to elevate from there. But it should be noted that the most complex boss here still boils down to hit the boss really hard, then spam healing items after it attacks. You could almost call it a prototype version of the combat system that would eventually become something like Final Fantasy XV. I'll let you decide for yourself if that's a good thing or a bad thing, but I'll say that for me, I enjoyed this process and am also a big fan of Final Fantasy XV. Two major critiques I want to give for the gameplay, however, are directly related to the dungeon crawling, so this feels like the best point to cover them. First, the spammy nature of player and enemy skills means that a lot of enemies will absolutely spam the hell out of status effect spells, which most aren't that big of a problem, except for Charm and Confuse, which will turn one party member against the rest of the party, and they can usually instantly kill the rest of the party. So fighting some enemies, like the mimics, which are their own bag of disappointment, can be especially frustrating, as you might be stuck spending the entire fight constantly recovering your allies who are getting charmed and confused over and over and over again. There is some armor in the later games that can mitigate the issue, but it's only the gear that casters or Kite can wear. Otherwise, simply be ready to constantly have to use restoratives on Black Rose or whatever other melee fighter Kite has brought along for a fight, with some fights against like 3 enemies sometimes requiring 10 or 15 restoratives. And if I used the skill with the same effect, the enemies would already reapply the status in the time it takes the animation for the spell to enact. Second, the item limit is way too steep. Being able to bring 40 items in and out of a dungeon might sound okay, but there are 700 items in the game, and it might not be obvious what is actually important to keep on us from one fight to the next. Given that keeping a stock of healing items, magic scrolls, and extra equipment to be prepared for everything a dungeon might have prepared to throw at Kite is extremely important, this 40 item limit pushes from frustrating to infuriating at times, especially in the longer dungeons. Altogether, it is way too limited and really only causes unneeded tedium and anxiety, as opposed to actually making me consider my inventory in a more meaningful way. Like how the encumbrance systems in Elder Scrolls and Fallout lean either on what items still have utility or have the best value to weight ratio. From dungeon to dungeon in .hack IMOQ, it's a gamble of what's going to require the least amount of menuing. And that's it for gameplay. Again, it's pretty simple and somewhat repetitive, especially when playing all 4 games in sequence. But it does enough to keep the combat interesting long enough to get through the story as it evolves over all 4 games. In fact, the act of crawling through each dungeon, while repetitive for sure, is incredibly addicting. To the point that once I was through the first game, I really didn't feel like I'd fully scratched the itch for the gameplay and was compelled to continue into the next game. If I had another critique to levy though, it would certainly be the fact that each game feels so interchangeable and simple in their combat that the series doesn't feel like an initial outing with 3 sequels that elevate the core gameplay and narrative structure, but rather 4 parts of a single whole that was split into pieces and released over the course of a year. This is extremely notable as we start to cover the story as it develops across these 4 volumes. While we went over the multimedia expansion of Project .hack back in the history section, noting the included OVA as well as the .hack Sign anime that aired right before the game's release, this story is self-contained and doesn't require the additional media to be understood, although some of the characters from Sign do make cameo appearances. That being said, the .hack IMOQ series does act as a sequel series to .hack Sign, and therefore consuming the 2 together gives a more complete view of the overall story. The setup for what we need here is that the game takes place in the not too distant future of 2011. It was 2002, so they weren't exactly taking huge swings. Although I will say that some of their assumptions for the future are surprisingly accurate for 2002, such as the aforementioned design of the at-home VR headsets. But a personal favorite comes later, as the devs correctly predict the future of video streaming. Several years before YouTube would hit the scene and start to reevaluate the ways we engage with video media online, and a whole 5 years before Netflix would start streaming and change the entire way that we engage with media today. Our protagonist, Kite, has recently purchased The World, the leading video game of the time and the largest and only functioning MMO on Earth. Talking about The World, the game, and the in-game world of IMOQ is going to be difficult, so if I start having to clumsily say Japan or Earth every time I need to mention the real world, it's so that every time I say The World, from here on out, I can assure it's about the in-universe game, where most of the game takes place. In the preamble before the game starts, the events of .hack Sign have already happened, which has led to the awakening of the AI character Aura. The fates of Tsukasa, Subaru, and the others in the anime are tangentially relevant at points throughout the game series, mostly as cameos, but Aura is central to the plot of IMOQ. For a bit more setup, a major virus across the internet as we knew it up until 2005 caused a number of outages across the Earth and was even linked to a number of deaths. This event was known as Pluto's Kiss, as in Pluto, the Roman god of death or ruler of the underworld. As a result of the massive outages, all computer operating systems and internet infrastructure were replaced by the CC Corporation's proprietary operating system, Ultimate. Basically, Windows in an alternate future where Mac OS and Linux don't exist. Now, 5 years out from the Pluto's Kiss event, the year is 2010 and our player character is trying out The World for the first time, after having been invited by his friend Yasuhiko to come play. At this point, however, at least 2 people we know from the .hack Sign anime have already been put into comas, and while one is woken up, not all have been so lucky. This leads us into the opening of the narrative of .hack Infection. We open up with a few emails with CC Corp thanking us for buying the world, and our friend from school, Yasuhiko, or Orca, since he's made it clear that we shouldn't call each other by our real names in here. So we take on the moniker of Kite, real name Prakuza, and we head into the world. Kite chooses to be a twin blade and seems to take some inspiration from his real-life self, taking the form of a young man, roughly his own age as a middle schooler, something Orca did not do, as he modeled his character after a fully grown, sexy-ass man covered in war paint. He actually looks shockingly similar to Bear from Dot Hack Sign, but the paint pattern is slightly altered and his hair is longer and a little lighter. On the topic of Kite having chosen Twin Blade as his class, I'd like to bring up the biggest critique I really have for the game. Beyond the repetitive nature of the dungeon crawl and the simplicity of the combat, which I've already covered, the most egregious gripe with the game is that players aren't given a choice among the various classes in the world, and instead are forced to play as a Twin Blade. However, CyberConnect 2 seemed aware of this issue, as making Kite a Twin Blade means that he gets to have access to a lot of physical and magical abilities, and takes a bit of a middle ground between the other more min-maxing classes. So even if I would have preferred to be given a choice in what class I'd spend the entire game playing as, the almost red mage archetyping of the Twin Blade keeps the player from feeling like they're missing out on any one aspect of combat, as Kite is able to move fairly seamlessly across both main types of damage. So take that into consideration when I do criticize any single part of the games, that even what I believe to be the worst decision by CyberConnect 2 is not only forgivable, but almost worthy of praise for the foresight of still keeping the player's toolkit very open. While Orca gives us the basic tutorial on playing the world, we also head to our first dungeon, Delta Bursting Passover Aquafield. After some extra tutorializing, we see Aura getting chased by a strange creature with a big red wand. Yes, that is apparently a wand. She attempts to give Orca something called the Book of Twilight, but he gets blasted by the big death-looking dude and disappears. So instead, Kite is given the book and we disappear out of there before the monster can get us too. Back on the desktop, Kite notes that Orca is in a coma in the real world. He doesn't want to believe that whatever happened to him back in the dungeon caused this, but the evidence seems to point in that direction. It certainly doesn't help his growing paranoia when Kite also gets an email from Aura, calling him back into the game. Following the only lead he has, Kite then heads back into the world, and meets Black Rose, who smack talks the shit out of him for being a noob, then forces him to follow her to the church at Delta Hidden Forbidden Holy Ground, also known as Holgrand's Cathedral from the anime series. A very atmospheric level, and we will never again find a place quite as unique. Which actually makes the term unique work for once. Here, the group meets Balmung, who is distrustful of Kite and his bracelet, and also appears to have been friends with Orca. The two are the top players of the game, and were investigating players falling into comas together. They are Orca of the Azure Sea and Balmung of the Azure Sky, the descendants of Fianna. Very important people tied to the lore of the world, and the associated text it is based on. This is also where we find out that Black Rose is looking for a way to cure someone named Kazu. A boy! Ooh! While we're here, we find a data bug, likely the one that put Kazu in a coma, and Kite uses the book given to him by Aura in order to obtain the bracelet that can data drain the monster, leaving it vulnerable for Balmung to finish it off. We also get our first look at Helba, a hacker with an angelic design. She looks totally sick with her military helmet, broad diamond weapon shoulders. The boob wraps is kinda silly, but par for the course with Black Rose's metal bikini. Next up, we meet Mia and Elk. Elk looks surprisingly like Tsukasa from Dot Hack Sign, and Mia has a unique character model, being a tall cat lady. Mia seems to be able to see the bracelet, and the two are a bit of an odd couple, with Elk hanging closely at her hip and seeming to be jealous of her new interest in Kite and his data-draining bracelet. At this point, the game starts to open up and gives us access to a few different locations. While we're roaming, we recruit Mistral, who will be our resident mage for the next 2 games, and Pyros, who will be on the bench until he forces his way into the party for a bunch of fucking filler. Mia then gives us a lead for where to find a new data bug in a protected area, and teaches us how to hack the Chaos Gate in order to let us into those zones. We've now run into the basic rundown of what the rest of the gameplay is going to be. We'll be running down into dungeons using data drain on enemies for gear and data cores, and using those cores in order to gain access into more protected areas, and find data bugs that will give us access, and so on and so forth. This is it. This is the next 4 games that I very much enjoy. Not a critique, simply an observation. And right now, we're going to break for spoilers. We have the basic plot set up and the stakes for the story, but we haven't really gotten into the nitty-gritty of exactly what's going on. Quick note at this point, we won't only be spoiling the Dot Hack games, but also the ending of Dot Hack Sign quite a bit, as the full scope of the overall narrative is heavily dependent on both at the same time. We'll also be talking about the Liminality OVA that came as a pack-in with the original run of the games, but we won't be touching on Roots or GU. That'll be for another video. So if you do want to take my somewhat tentative recommendation to play through these games yourself, then now might be a good time for you to pull out of the video, or you can skip to the time on screen so that you can get my unspoilery conclusion. Otherwise, we're getting into it. Alright, everyone who's okay with spoilers, ready for us to go? Okay, perfect. It's her brother, Kazu. Kazu's her brother. I'm spoiling that right now. Kazu is Black Rose's brother. They make a big deal about it in like 2 games because they want to stretch out the stupid will they, won't they bullshit for her and Kite. Spoiler for not even this series of games, by the way. They do. They do. There, I saved you the 4-year wait for Dot Hack GU. From there, we get some tips from the board, pick up some extra party members like Natsume. Fun fact, I took a short break between recording sessions on this game, and my girlfriend completely forgot who this character was until I had a side quest to help her again, all the way in Outbreak. So she will not be getting utilized much, but that has a lot more to do with the fact that she doesn't fit well with my preferred party makeup. I like to have a fully melee character and a fully magic character to complement Kite's middle-of-the-road role. This does mean that I didn't get a lot of the emails that flesh out the secondary characters, since I rarely used them to increase their affection gauges, which is a thing. In fact, the emails is one of the best parts of the game, with these back-and-forth correspondences slowly building up these characters from one-note 2-dimensional archetypes into eventually fully realized 3-dimensional characters with likes and dislikes and wants and needs and wishes and dreams. I get some of these and really enjoy them, but getting them all is a long process that I might have gone for if I was playing these games over the course of a year, as opposed to in the month since my last Retro Respect. We eventually get a new lead that takes us to the next available server, and a new server town. This starts us on raising grunties as well, but we've already discussed everything we need to for that. The process really is that bare bones. The grunties are adorable though. I like the iron one. He's like a little knight. Clang!
I must repay my debt to you. Clang!
Back in Delta server, Elk tries to get us killed as we head into a special area and fight a data bug. He asks us for the bracelet because Mia is interested in it and he wants all of her attention. Surely this will continue to be a completely healthy relationship with absolutely no consequences. We then follow some board hints for extras stuff and recruit Sandro, our resident samurai and Kurosawa-obsessed movie buff. I mean, I say Kurosawa because that's the only classic Japanese director I can name from memory, but he mentions a lot of films and franchises and their creators. We then get this game's mandatory Pyros mission, as he attempts to remove a color-changing bug that Mia has infected him with. Very anime comedy stuff, very slapstick. I thought it was funny when I was a kid, and honestly, that Darren Norris vocal performance makes me laugh now.
This must be the one! I'm sure it is! Whoa!
Well, almost.
Can't not laugh when Cosmo's in the scene. Prepare for one of these dungeons to appear in pretty much every single game. We head into another protected area, this time taking Mistral with us, but she doesn't really understand what's going on here, or what the data bug at the bottom of the dungeon is. But she does wind up leaving because of something taking her attention in the real world. She's an odd one, kinda airheaded and very naturally aloof, as in she's unbothered by everything in a somewhat whimsical nature, rather than trying to be too cool for school. Fuck, I'm old. Our next location is Theta, Cursed Despaired Paradise. It's another protected area we need to hack into, but fortunately the data bugs we've been finding on the other random padding quests got us the data cores we need to proceed. This one has a strange room that has a bed and a bunch of teddy bears. A familiar location from .hack sign actually, but the important thing here is that we get Harold's note. We'll learn more about him later, but for now it is a vague script about a mysterious girl written in flowery poetic prose. That will matter later, but it gives us a little bit of the information we need to start piecing the puzzling narrative together. We're then given a runaround by some of Orca's in-game contacts, which sends us to Delta Lonely Silent Great Seal to find another strange room with a rocking chair and a bunch of holes gouged into it. Plus, we also find Epitaph ? Helba then gives us our final lead to Theta Chosen Hopeless Nothingness. We tried to track down the people who first posted it to the board, but they refused to tell us, since it sounds dangerous. After finishing up the remaining side quests, we head to the final dungeon of .hack Infection. Here, we fight the man, the myth, the legend himself, Skeeth, the first phase, and it's too late to save Aura. Still, we can avenge Orca and kill this bastard good and dead. And the fight is an interesting introduction to how bosses will play out from here on out. Up until now, the closest thing we've gotten to a boss are the data bugs, and this plays out similar to them, except that periodically Skeeth will execute an attack that stops the party dead in their tracks and simply deals damage. Nothing we can do to better position against it or block it, it simply happens. Not that this is a problem, it keeps the marriage of turn-based and action game that early MMOs at the time had been trying to make work. It's also a totally new challenge that we need to deal with. Fortunately, the power of capitalism and buying a ton of healing products gets us comfortably through to the end. Hell yeah, money. Alright, we data drain Skeeth, kill the stones that he's apparently really made of under the initial facade, and get our vengeance. Happy day! Less happy day. Yeah, that's Kubia, and he's not happy to see us working to help Aura. And as we're blasted out of there, we head into the credits. Once we're finished here, we get one final challenge in the form of the dungeon Delta Hideous Someone's Giant. This takes us to the final optional dungeon, which is made up of the ships that are transporting a giant mummy. We've actually been able to see the mummy in the sky on any of the maps in the Delta server. The dungeon is pretty normal, with a lot of the strongest enemies available to us in Infection in most of the rooms. Then we get the Parasite Dragon. It plays out a lot more like a Databug fight, but he's not infected. It's actually more of an event in the world, where the monster is corrupting the ships that are transporting the flying giant. Apparently, killing the dragon will help fix the ships, but we never really get to see the effect of this in-game, even in future games. Or if we did, I never noticed the difference. Prepare for one of these flying endgame dungeons in every game, by the way. And that is .hack Infection. It's honestly pretty short, and limited on the complex narrative that made .hack Sign an instant classic. While the game is fun and the mystery is tantalizing, this was a bit disappointing, especially with a cliffhanger that promised to not be fully revealed for 3 more games. This is also why I was pretty confident in covering 4 games in a single video, because as long as I skip over some of the superfluous stuff, like recruiting Gardenia, each game should only take like 20 minutes to summarize. In the meantime, let's take a look at the first volume of .hack Liminality, the OVA included as a pack-in for the original release of the games. Episode 1 is the longest in this mini-series, and it has a lot of setup it needs to get across. Titled In the Case of Mai Minase, the first episode follows Mai Minase, a high school student who was nearly put into a coma while playing The World. Meanwhile, her boyfriend? It's vague. She's a bit antisocial. It's hard to tell if she's actually into him. Tomonari Kasumi falls fully into his coma. We also meet a former CC Corp executive and lead developer, Junichiro Tokuoka. who is attempting to turn whistleblower about the coma victims, and spends most of the episode trying to get Mai to help him uncover the truth behind the incidents. Tokuoka also claims that in Japan alone, there are at least 6 other people currently in comas. We can assume that one of these is Orica, another is Black Rose's brother Kazu, and another one is Sora from Dot Hack Sign. So this leaves 3 additional coma patients. By the end of the episode, Mai and Tokuoka enter the game together again, and are nearly caught in another coma-inducing event. But Mai is able to save them both before either are lost permanently. It would seem that the key to the effect involves sound, and Mai's history with the violin is what got her out of her own coma in the first place. Outside of that little bit of narrative, the whole episode is very artfully crafted, with lots of long, contemplative shots that dive deep into Mai's personal life and her struggles with her friends and her mother. It's a great little episode that, like the game it's packaged in with, sets the stage for the overall series that would continue to unravel over the course of the next year. So in that case, let's get to the next game in the series, Dot Hack Mutation. Loading up Mutation, we get to do the coolest thing a video game has ever let me do. Load in the save from the previous title. We mentioned it briefly in the history section, but I want to elaborate on this a bit now. Because how many games have done this before? How many games have done this since? I mean, wouldn't it have made sense for Final Fantasy VII Remake to start off your next adventure with fully leveled characters from the previous game? Wouldn't it remove the need for every Kingdom Hearts to give Sora a factory reset? But Bandai had the balls to actually do it. Keep a continuous continuity from the start of the first game through to the 4th game in the series. Absolutely incredible. Also, double-edged sword. Because while the continuity is cool, we lose the opportunity for meaningful innovation on the game's systems. Back to the Kingdom Hearts example specifically, would that series still have the following it does if Kingdom Hearts 2 played exactly like Kingdom Hearts 1, but only moved the goalpost on the level cap and expanded the story? No, hindsight has done nothing good for Kingdom Hearts 1's clunky, stiff battle system over the years. Even if there are still fans like myself that enjoy playing it, the innovations made into the sequel make Kingdom Hearts 2 this superior game from a mechanical standpoint. And continued innovation is what has kept that series alive. Keeping everything stagnant kinda works for IMOQ with its very fast release window of a new game every 3 months, but it also certainly is responsible for the rarity of physical copies of Quarantine now, as the lack of innovation meant that the games performed worse and worse in sales as the series continued, which led to fewer copies being printed. Still, the novelty of being able to keep level progression, item unlocks, even the extras from the Ryu books that decorate my desktop, getting to carry over? It's such a cool idea. Okay, rant over, and the new grunty racing minigame finished while I was talking, we're heading out to Theta Chosen Hopeless Nothingness. Jeez, some of these area names are so on the nose with their meanings, it's hard to call them deeper since it's so surface level. In Basement 5, we're starting to get deep with these now, we get a sweet moment between Kite and Black Rose, as the danger of the situation starts to rattle her and Kite tries to break the ice and comfort her. We also nearly get the explanation from Black Rose about who Kazu is, but Balmung appears and interrupts us. Will they? Won't they? Who cares? Kinda me while I was playing, which is why the fact that the answer is in a different game series pisses me off enough that I went ahead and spoiled it already. Then we find a dead end and leave the dungeon, only to be greeted back at town by a shopkeeper trying to give us a special power-up book, as part of a sweepstakes we never entered or heard of before being told we won. Definitely not sus, and we should definitely try to use the books that the shopkeeper tries to give us for an instant power bonus right away. Although they don't seem to work. We then get a hint from Helba that we need to head to Theta Soaring Sky Boundless Abyss. Turns out this is not from Helba, but a systems administrator for CC Corp, the company that owns the world, as in the game, not like the entire world. That's publicly owned by the United States government, and he's attempting to delete us from the system, as he assumes we're the source of the problems happening in the game. Helba vouches for us, fat lot of good that does since she's a notorious hacker herself, and hints that there is more going on with relation to the Epitaph of Twilight, an epic poem that the game world is based on, to the point that even the name Leos, the designation for the systems administrator, comes from the Epitaph itself. With this new information at hand, Leos lets us go for the time being, and we strike a tenuous accord between our groups, Helba and the CC Corp. Not in a we're all on the same team sort of way, but more of a we'll stay out of each other's way until we figure out what's going on with the comas and data corruption and such. We are then given access to Lambda server and its root town of Carmina Gadalika. Honestly, this is probably my favorite root town in the series. A city on the edge of the water, it feels like the vibe it's shooting for is Venice at night, but it also winds up giving off a Xanarkin type vibe from Final Fantasy X. Towns are super bare bones and don't really feel like lived-in spaces, but they all at least encapsulate an atmosphere that pervades each game. And the atmosphere here makes Mutation one of my favorites, since this is when we spend the most time in Lambda server. Next up, we find that something has gone wrong with Mia. She isn't able to properly speak, and we assume that heading into the dungeon of Lambda Dolores Evil-Eyed Widow, after a tip from the board that a girl matching Aura's description was found there, might help Mia recover. Another protected area that we need to hack into, we do find a data bug that gives us a unique virus core, and we even get the aromatic grass that Mia and Elk are always looking for. But while it seems like we've fixed Mia's voice at first, the fix doesn't stick. Another hint from the board sends us to Lambda Nameless Seeker's Prairie, as we continue trying to track down Aura. At this point, you may be noticing a theme. We've been in and out of a lot of dungeons for about 6 hours of what will eventually amount to an 18-hour playthrough of Mutation alone, and we've essentially done some Mia filler and hit some dead ends. We also admittedly did recruit like 3 more players, but that's all side stuff. But after all of this, our biggest revelation on the story so far is the introduction of Leos, which was like 4 hours ago. It's a consistent thread for all of these games. While the story and the world building with the board and the news bulletins are fascinating, the actual narrative is extremely padded and really doesn't deliver a lot of punch from game to game. For now though, we find another data bug at the bottom of the dungeon, and also meet a strange type of character. It's a self-animated piece of corrupted player data. Think of it like a rogue AI that's lost a lot of the basic processes that would make it behave like a real person, since the real person has been removed from its data. We'll get more into the weeds of that in the final game once we go over the full story. When we report this to Leos, he calls it failed data. The allegory isn't entirely clear yet, but these failed data characters act as a bit of a stand-in for your classic vagabond, mentally unstable folks with no home to return to. We can clear it up a bit more later on, but for now, that's the gist of these strange NPCs. Next up is Lambda resurrecting Confused Judgment. What do you know? The data bugs we've been fighting have given us the data course we need to get in here. See, it wasn't padding, it was a necessary 10-hour set of detours. Here we find Phase 2, Enos, the Mirage of Deceit. We're seeing a pattern in these special bosses, by the way. Each one seems to get a phase number and a name, but we don't quite know how many phases there are yet, or what they even mean. The Enos boss fight is almost exactly the same as Skeith before him. Hit it a bunch and really hard, avoid the ground pounds, heal after the unavoidable attacks. Repeat until the data drain is available, and then do the same thing against the Stones form. I started to comment on this with Skeith, but it's even more clear against Enos that these fights are incredibly by the number at this point, and with the bosses lacking any type of elemental weakness, there's no build variety that can hammer on their vulnerabilities in any way over any other build. So while it is a nice mix-up on boss design compared to the standard enemies or even the data bugs, we still haven't run into any bosses that add enough unique flair to be interesting. Once we've killed Enos, things fail to return to normal, or corrupt any further, so it's difficult to say how well we've tipped the scales in either direction. We're also given Segment 1 for our troubles. One thing we do know is that once we're back on the desktop, an email from Aura sends us to Lambda Merciless Grieving Furnace, and a warning to be wary of Kubia. Quick note on the Aura messages that we've been getting so far. I really like these. They're a very simple type of jumbled message that gives us enough information to be able to pick out the meaning through the corruption, but still gives us a little something to do in order to get to figuring them out. Very nice use of the email system, makes me feel really smart for deciphering the message, even if it is an ultimately simple and unnecessary puzzle, if you want to call it that. In the next dungeon, we're forced to be accompanied by Mistral, which is fine since she's part of my A-team anyway. Always good to have a Wave Master with us, since magic can be super powerful. Kite finally gives Mistral the full rundown on what's been happening this whole time, but she doesn't believe us at first. Then we find Aura, and she retrieves the fragment of her that we'd gotten from Enos. That's what the segment 1 was. There are more scattered pieces of her around, and we'll find them all before the end of the story, but not in this game. After seeing that, Mistral starts to believe in Kite, and fighting Kubia confirms to her that it wasn't a joke or a roleplay. So Mistral resolves to help in any way she can. Next, we get some filler. Mia has messed with Pyrrhus again, and we go for a funny little filler arc through another dungeon. Thank you again, Mr. Norris, for at least making this enjoyable. Even if it's all old Nickelodeon nostalgia, making this work for me. We also take this filler time to go on a side quest to meet Mimiru, the Black Rose counterpart from Dot Hack Sign. To move along the plot, we get an email from Linda, Orca's friend from the previous game, who sends us to Lambda Dying Madness Haunted Land, as Balmung is following Orca's trail in that direction. Naturally, we find Balmung in another strange room, this time filled with bird cages, and we're read a section of the Epitaph of Twilight. The single cage on the pedestal is undestroyed, but open, having released whatever bird was trapped there. Some nice symbolism to go with the epitaph excerpt. Our next step is to track down someone named Wiseman at Lambda Dazzling Sages Arctic. He supposedly has information on the Epitaph of Twilight, which, as notes from the board suggest, no one has been able to find and read the entire thing in quite some time. It's become a collector's item, and the only surviving copy was purchased by the creator of The World himself. I won't do the joke again, you know what I mean. After finding Wiseman, he sends us to another dungeon, Lambda Blooming Promised Walkway. What do you know, it's also a protected area. If I knew any better, I'd call this whole mission a bunch of extra padding with no real reason. We get the item from him, and on our way back see Balmung and Leos talking to each other. When we turn in the spark sword Wiseman wanted, it's made clear that he was testing us to see if we could get into the protected area. Although Kite already figured that was the real test, even if Black Rose hadn't quite put 2 and 2 together yet. Prepare for this to consistently be the case actually, as Kite is pretty easily able to read people and their intentions, while Black Rose is often the oblivious one. While I appreciate not having the playable character be a total moron for once, this exact split happens to land on a bit of a gender bias. Not saying it's intended, especially since Black Rose's brash, assertive nature is a common archetype that gets paired with being kind of an airhead or at least imperceptive, but definitely that it's a possible read to take. After explaining the situation, Wiseman agrees to help us and gives us his player address, meaning he becomes a party member, which will be nice in the next game. You'll see. More on that in like 5 minutes. We also get an email that gives us a major excerpt from the Epitaph of Twilight. There are a few major revelations here. One is that 2 names of the things we've killed are in this excerpt, implying that we have 6 more phases to go before the end of this story. Magus, Fidchel, Gore, Maha, Tarvos, and Korbanik. One of those names should be familiar if you've recently watched Dot Hack Sign, by the way. We also learn of something known as the Cursed Wave, which seems to fit as the larger problem behind the data corruptions that we've been encountering. On the board, we also find a clue for where to find a place known as the Net Slum, somewhere Wiseman has pointed us toward in order to meet with Helba again, at Lambda Scattering Fossils Milestone. And we get our first game over of mutation as Black Rose is confused into killing the rest of the party and dies before she can revive the rest of us. Cool. Awesome. Love how powerful confusion is and that I was already 10 minutes into that dungeon before dying. Fantastic. Anyway, when we get to the end of this dungeon, after another 10-minute crawl, we meet another one of those failed data characters, only for Leos to murder it in front of us. The metaphor for the action is pretty clear, especially with how the cinematography frames Leos killing it. Fortunately, we at least got the location we needed, Lambda Pulsating Worst Core, before the murder took place. We'll need a special virus core to get there, and fortunately, Balmung has one for us. Strange. Where'd he get that? Heading into the dungeon, we also get what will be the best puzzle in the entire series. These games are not about puzzles, so I'm glad that they at least tried something. Either way, we are told the exact directions to go in a Lost Woods-style series of rooms with doors facing each of the cardinal directions. So we head east, north, south, west, north, and we can get further into the dungeon. Again, not much, but I'm glad they tried. This gets us into the Net Slum, a central hub for those failed data characters to live out of sight of other players, and of course, Leos, who wants to destroy everyone here. And would you look at that? It would appear that Leos followed us here in order to find and destroy the Net Slum. Sure would be awful if the cursed wave showed up now to not only prove our innocence, but also put everyone here in a coma, and give us our final fight of the game against Phase 3, Magus, the Propagation. This fight is almost identical to Skeeth and Enos, but there is a new mechanic. Yay! Small leaves will fall over time from Magus's main body, and after a brief countdown, they will explode and deal damage over a large area. This can be avoided with positioning, but since dealing damage usually requires sticking close to Magus, avoiding the damage means not dealing damage to the boss. And after 10 minutes of attacking, we finally data drain Magus and can finish it off. The result? Well, the Net Slum starts to break apart, but it ultimately remains mostly intact. Before we head back to Carmina Gadalika, where we see the full effects of the infection that continues to spread through the world. And it's so shocking that we get the classic show of distress.
Maybe this was a turning point.
Yeah, we fucked up. And it's postgame time at Theta Bitter Fantasy Mirror World. This time we're heading to a floating castle and we fight a giant cursed mech called Engelmore. Hit it really hard, capitalism healing items to survive its crazy attacks, data drain for the strongest weapon in .hack mutation, which will be replaced the second I start actually playing Outbreak. Speaking of which, we're not going to be doing individual breakdowns. Instead, we're running straight through to the rest of the series all in one go. However, first, let's take another look at .hack liminality, with the second episode of the OVA, in the case of Yuki Aihara. This one barely involves most of the cast of the previous episode, with only fleeting moments of Tokuoka to give any connecting thread to the previous episode. Instead, most of this runtime follows Yuki Aihara, who is a friend of Tominari's. After Tokuoka got access to Tominari's account in the previous episode, they agreed to meet and share information they knew about the world and the coma patients. However, before the meeting can take place, the cursed wave's pulse at the end of mutation happens, and phone lines go down in Yokohama, a real-life city within the greater Tokyo area south of Tokyo itself. During this city-wide network event, Yuki gets trapped in a shopping center/movie theater, and is guided out by an older woman who is voiced by Mary Elizabeth McGlynn, who I point out because this is also the voice actor for Helba. And this connection is the closest we've ever gotten to the possible identity of the legendary hacker across the entire franchise over the last 25 years. This voice actor sharing is also consistent in Japanese, with Yumi Toma also providing the voice of both Helba and this woman, who by the end of the episode we learn is named Kaoru Asaba. By the end of the episode, both Yuki and Kaoru escape the theater to safety. The phone lines come back, and Yuki's eventual meeting with Tokuoka ends in a new lead that Ryoko, another member of Tominari's online friend group, could have some insight on the Epitaph of Twilight, as she is currently studying it in school. With that behind us, we can head into the third game, which is actually my favorite of the four. We'll get to why quickly. The start of Outbreak is a rather somber affair. First we meet Mia wandering around Carmina Gadalika, although something is off about her. Elk isn't with her, and she's hunched over, rambling about the corrupted state of the world. To note, the last time we saw her, something strange had happened to her speech patterns, remember? The very next thing we do is meet with Mistral, who tells us that she can't risk getting involved in the dangers we're chasing after, because she's an expecting mother, and she can't risk her and her baby's safety. Then we also confess our wavering resolve to Black Rose, who storms off after hearing Kite get this close to quitting. And suddenly, no one will answer our calls. We aren't getting any emails. Kite is left completely alone. We get access to the next server, Sigma. The town is Fort Oof. On our own, we check an area that Orica was investigating at Sigma Chatting Snaring Twins. Once we're through here, we meet with Balmung, and together we resolve to follow in Orca's footsteps together, which means we finally get Balmung's member address. Then we get an email from Black Rose, who wants to meet back at Holgrand's Cathedral, the place at Delta Hidden Forbidden Holy Ground. Here, Black Rose finally tells us that Kazu is her brother, and that he was put into a coma here while waiting to play with her. That's why she brought us here in the first place, to find out what happened to him, but she was too scared to come alone. In fact, the data bug we killed here with Data Drain was likely the one who put Kazu in the coma in the first place. With the conversation finished, we can head back to the desktop, and it turns out we've got emails from all of our friends. Kite isn't alone, they've simply been busy or blocked out from the game. Now they're here, and we can spend some time with all of those guys you remember, like Nuke Usagimaru and Marlo. You remember them, right? Alright, we do some side quest stuff, and I actually have some notes about one of these side quests, Sandro's. Apparently, Sandro couldn't figure out the quiz in this place on his own, even though the quiz is literally a bunch of very basic idioms. When Kite himself realized that Sandro didn't know that patience is a virtue, he starts staring daggers at the man. I swear, I'm not in control of the camera here. This is simply the only logical response that reason could give to his idiocy. Whatever, we get him a cool katana for our efforts and move on. One more side quest, we also follow a note on the board to Lambda stalking betrayed nothingness, where we can apparently find Skeeth's wand from infection. By interacting with this, we also free Sora from it, who was put into a coma and trapped in the scythe back in Dothack's sign. Yeah, this is how we find out his ultimate fate from that show. Deep into a side dungeon in the third volume of the 4-part video game sequel series. Look out for him on a later date, by the way, as in a different video. Guess I'm really committing to doing GU now, huh? Oops. Spoilers. Anyway, moving on to the plot, now we can head to the net slum. We've got a direct link from Lambda server now, no need to go through the dungeon from before. And there we get a message from Helba to meet her at Sigma Tested Quicksilver Valkyrie. We need to head there alone, and it works pretty well. We're here to recruit Helba to work alongside us and Leos in order to take on the Cursed Wave together. Clearly, none of what we've been doing for now is working. Our next step is then to fight the next of the 8 phases at Sigma Turbulent Distrusting Ice Wall. Although, now we can talk about the grind. The game is already very padded, like very padded, like extremely so much unnecessary padding. You could sleep on these games and it would feel like a cloud. And the need to constantly data drain enemies for data cores adds a bit more to that. But it was never a problem in my playthrough up until Outbreak. But once it does become a problem, it continues to be from here through to the end of even the 4th game. So even though I've done all of the side quests available and data drain very regularly, I still need to go grind for RNG dependent data cores. It's a bit of a drag. Some of this could be caused by the fact that a lot of the side quests have sent me back to older servers, and it's only cores in the newest server that I need to hunt down. But I really like that we're going to all of the old servers instead of abandoning them the way we did in Mutation. So it's a bit of a give and take, but it could have been made better by simply reducing the cost to access protected areas and making the enemies that drop the cores we need more frequent. Because I needed the small enemy cores from Sigma, the H cores. But most of the areas were only spawning medium and large size enemies, likely as a result of the higher levels of the dungeons that we're diving in now. Anyway, after a few hours of grinding, we get to Sigma Turbulent Distrusting Ice Wall. This dungeon does lead us to fight another phase, 4th phase, Fidchel, the Prophet. Very much more of the same, but somehow the most fun we've had against one of these bosses. This is mostly because of the way that Fidchel preps for its attacks and delivers damage. This methodology forces a lot of reacting on my end that Kite can do that makes this fight more than only hitting it very hard and data draining it once we've dealt enough damage. It's enough of a twist on the formula that I don't even mind that while the fight is happening, that the nature of the undodgeable attacks keeping the in-game clock ticking forces me to miss the data break window the first time, even though it adds almost 5 minutes to the fight as a result. We also get the second fragment of Aura, segment 2, and hear another part of the Epitaph of Twilight. although it doesn't look like anything negative has happened this time, and no extra corruption has spread outside of the fights. That being said, this is a great time to mention that as we've been fighting the phases, there have been ripple effects outside of the game that we've been seeing in the news, mostly with systems that are connected to Ultimate lightly malfunctioning. The worst of it so far has been some phone lines going down, since apparently the developers thought we'd still be on dial-up by 2011, instead of on the high-speed broadband or fiber optics we take for granted now. This has caused some issues with financial markets and stock exchanges, and we're also given confirmation on what happened in the theater in Liminality Volume 2. The news report implies that some people did die in that theater, though it's unclear how many, and future reports will soften the blow, making it seem like it was a handful of incidental injuries rather than deaths. But I'll chalk that up to early 2000s anime localization having a tendency to censor away any deaths in anime of the time. Think of the cargo ships that Nappa destroys in Dragon Ball Z. Then, back in the world, we find Mia again. She's with Elk, but she doesn't seem quite herself, and she seems to be forgetting us. This is much worse than the simple speech issue she had back in Mutation, and now makes her and Elk unusable as party members, until she's able to recover. We also find Balmung arguing with Leos at an item shop, annoyed that he was used in order to bring Leos to Netslum in the last game. Leos then sends us to Sigma Rising Implicable Sipping Bug. We follow along, but we don't like it. But we still do it, so doesn't matter if we don't like it, huh? Almost like Kite really lacks agency at this point. There's a data bug, which gives us a unique data core, more filler, then another Pyros mission, speaking of filler. Back in town, we finally get a real apology from Balmung towards Black Rose. He's already made good with Kite, but he'd never acknowledged his actions towards her individually, and now he does. I like it. A lot of games wouldn't really bother to have the antagonizing force-turned ally take the time to acknowledge what they've done to individual party members, as opposed to the group as a whole or the protagonist only. Kite then hears Aura's voice and is told to go to Lambda Merciless Grieving Furnace. This is one of the most out-of-nowhere leads in the whole series. Like, usually we're sleuthing through the board and emails, which is a highlight for the series, I'll be honest. It's not really a puzzle, but it at least makes our investigation feel slightly more organic. Sinking City this is not, but it's still a fun break from the monotony of dungeon crawling. This leads us to a fight with Kubia, the giant monster we saw back at the end of Infection after beating Scathe, and who we fought back in Mutation. I didn't really go over his fight then, but I'll give the encounter a little more detail now. This is a unique fight and is pretty cool right now. It makes good use of the major attacks by having the Kubia core that we fight in place of the giant boss, changing its tolerance from magic to physical on repeat. I really like it, and honestly, I love the unique bosses in this game so far. Would love to see more of this. Oh, fuck. Shit. I was holding a monkey's paw when I said that. Also, cool design note about Kubia, it appears to be growing the more the infection and corruption spreads, and it really is starting to look like a tumor, like it's cancerous. Really great design there, and love the visual representation of the sickness that Kubia is to the world. So now it's time to actually get the whole team together, and Black Rose suggests that we team up with Helba and Leos together, because we can't beat the wave and Kubia if we're all scattered. The infection is increasing and growing stronger, and we need to settle our differences and get all hands on deck here. In order to cooperate, Leos demands we kill a data bug without data drain. It's a fake, so we're able to kill it, but Kite still manages to prove his resolve to Leos and get him helping on the CC Corp end of things. It's everyone's problem now, and we're all on the same side. We're then sent on a wild goose chase looking for the next boss. More filler, but we do kill another dangerous data bug. We then get the real location of another strange room at Sigma Resonating False Grasslands. This puts us in a room that looks like an old shack with a dog collar and food bowl in front of it. And we get another fragment of the Epitaph of Twilight. Finally, once we've done enough filler, we can head to Sigma Chatting Snaring Twins, the location where we'd previously met with Balmung at the beginning of Outbreak. Neat. Here, we fight Phase 5, Gore, the Machinator. The worst boss of Outbreak, but honestly, this game has the best bosses in the series. Even Gore himself is unique in that it is made up of two separate faces, and each one is immune to a different type of damage. So this one requires the most micromanaging in order to make sure that each party member is attacking the right head with the right type of damage. While I prefer Fidchel, Gore is still better than phases 1 through 3, so it's unfortunate that Outbreak ends on its weakest note instead of notching up from Gore to Fidchel. It's still a much more interesting fight than the final boss of the previous 2 games. Anyway, hit it really hard, data drained the boss after 10 minutes, our friends resolve to finish the fight in the next game, and we roll credits. Alright, post-game time. Lambda, pulsating, Sea of Clouds, whale. This one is awesome, because it's a floating monster we saw in the skies of Lambda server way back in Mutation. I was so excited to fight him before, and I'm glad that we actually get to do that now. Anyway, it's a normal dungeon with a final boss at the end who refuses to get data drained. I would normally get a powerful weapon from doing this, but it'll be replaced the second I start the next game anyway, so who cares? Kill it, we get some The World lore about the Black Death having corrupted the giant sky whale, and it should be in better shape after what we've done now. I like that. Cool. Time for another detour into liminality. The third volume is titled In the Case of Kyoko Tono. As the title implies, this time we're mostly focusing on Kyoko, who we heard about on the phone in Volume 2, as she's another of Tomonari's online friends. Her design with the jumpsuit and everything makes her look a lot older than she really is, because it turns out she's actually in high school. But her schooling does have her studying the Epitaph of Twilight, so most of this episode involves Kyoko and Tokuoka going on a bit of a wild goose chase, being led around by Helba and her helpers to both test them on their knowledge of the Epitaph, but also to reveal some truths behind the game. Eventually, they meet with a man under the alias of Ichiro Sato, and he fills everyone in on the backstory lore of The World, and its connection to the Epitaph of Twilight. Most notably, he gives the connection that The World and its beta predecessor, Fragment, are both heavily based on the Epitaph of Twilight by Emma Weinhard, partially as a testament of love from the game's creator, Harold Horwick, even though she never really loved him in return. However, through that work, Harold attempts something in the programming of The World, which the show refers to as taking a part of the outside world to the inside world of the game, creating a blurred line between the two, called a liminality, as in the in-between transitional space. We've got no-clipping backrooms 20 years before the YouTube sensation and 50 years before the movie. This liminality is the cause of the comas, as when each person logs into The World, part of themselves is being brought into the game itself, something like their soul, and when a data bug or anything related to the cursed wave attacks them, it scatters that outside part of the person throughout the data of The World, stopping their soul from returning to their body and leaving them in a comatose state. The episode ends with Sato inviting the Four to join him in the final volume, to save the servers from a shutdown that will trap the coma victims in their current state forever, and erase all history of CC Corp's wrongdoings. Okay, on to the final game, .hack Quarantine. Alright, here we are. 20 years of waiting and a potential $350 price tag that I did not want to pay later, and we've arrived to the final game in the 4-volume series. And we're immediately met with conflict. Offline, we get news stories about more internet issues, this time now causing more than a few problems with financial markets. We've got major blackouts shrouding city districts in darkness, both meaning without lights, but also without information, as internet and phone access is cut off. The kind of thing we had already seen in the Volume 2 of Liminality. A second network crisis is now being confirmed. Pluto again, the return of network death. And online, The World, Elk has become frantic, looking for Mia, who never stopped acting strange. Kite calms him down, but things aren't looking good for Elk and Mia at this point. We're also given access to the 5th and final server, Omega server, and its root town, Leah Fail. It looks like a nice little location, a mountain shrine under the watch of a grand harvest moon. But things don't go quite right, and as soon as we arrive, the cursed wave appears to destroy us and the entire server. Helba arrives and warps us to her own mirror version of Omega server, the Net Slum. From here, we can head out into Omega server areas and dungeons, which we'll be doing for most of this game, especially when we need to grind more data cores. Great! After chastising Leos and his CC Corp comrades as pigheads for a while,
We'll get more pig heads.
Shut up!
Putting pigheads aside,
he tells us to doom scroll through Twitter. Man, the data core cost of these gates is starting to get steep. Good thing we've got plenty of them. Right? After we get a data core M from Twitter, we're randomly given a new location from one of the rogue data characters in NetSlum. This is honestly how we'll get a lot of our locations in the game. So, a lot less sleuthing through the board and emails to track down leads and find the next mandatory dungeon. In this case, we head to Sigma Screaming Windsands Fate Castle. Once again, love that these last two games make use of past servers more often, making the world feel like a larger, more complete game world and explorable environment, rather than making each volume in the overall series be a dive into a completely disconnected server each time. Anyway, this also starts off the absolute worst grind for extra data cores, requiring 3 data core Js, which drop from enemies that don't appear a lot in the Omega server dungeons. These are the small enemies. With the game focusing on larger, more powerful enemies at higher levels, the small enemy cores become more and more rare and require a lot more dedicated hunting to gather. Another grind later, and we arrive in our newest location, where we get some quotes from Harold, directly from the man himself, not him quoting the epitaph again. Although at the end, we get another strange room and some more epitaph stuff. This one is pretty well focused on his personal life, and both the loss of Emma, who the game almost frames as being his wife or lover, and the daughter he wished to have with her. Liminality Volume 3 really mucks this part of the story up. Harold comes off as extremely creepy. We'll get to that on a deeper level soon. After the dungeon, we speak with Elk again and finally recruit him into the fight against the Cursed Wave. Next up, we've got side quests and Pyros filler. And we assemble at NetSlum to start Operation Orca, where we use the hunting patterns of real-life orcas to funnel prey into a location with no escape before feeding. Then we head to Omega Cruel Vindictive Scars. This is by far the worst part of this game, and really hammers on how padded the series gets. Again, this is a 70-hour playthrough, but I'm pretty sure I have way less to say about it than the last 60-hour game I made a video about that all came on a single disc. Like, if you cut all the filler and left only the killer, this whole series could easily be trimmed to like 10 hours of diving into maybe 15 identical dungeons. To clarify my thoughts on the padding in these 4 games, as this specific critique has started to dip a little further into the negative than I'd hoped it would, I've been throwing around the word filler a lot, like I'm talking about some shonen anime that refuses to get back to the good fights. However, while these games are certainly padded, I don't mean to say that the side quest dungeons aren't fun to engage with. If there was any side content that I didn't want to complete, then I wouldn't have completed it, even for the sake of the video. The final optional Grandia dungeon in that retro respect is a testament to this fact. So know that I absolutely went into every side dungeon excited to see what morsels of character interaction I would get from each of my party members. And that actually leads to a major win for the games. I talked about it a little with the emails and how they help to flesh out the extra characters, but it should be noted that each character is wonderful to interact with, and the full team as a whole is a major highlight of the games. So many of them have these fun little interactions that breaks up the monotony of what otherwise would be the same dungeon crawl over and over across 4 titles. Instead, making each interaction a new look into the person behind the avatar. Anyway, we get all the way to the bottom of the dungeon, and we're immediately sent to Sigma Graceful Tempting Falling Angel. Glad this was a useless dead end. Okay, heading to a different dungeon for some fucking reason. At least we get a pretty good story moment here, as Elk has found Mia, and Mia realizes the truth. While we've thought this whole time that she's some sort of hacker and that's why her character model is different than anyone else we've ever met, what we come to find out here is that she's actually an advanced AI. Specifically, she is Phase 6 of the Cursed Wave. Maha, the Temptress. Not quite as interesting of a fight as the phases back in Outbreak, but at least this encounter has a ton of narrative weight, which lands hard when after we kill Maha, Mia dies, and Elk wanders off completely broken. Rough stuff. Anyway, back to Omega Cruel Vindictive Scars 2 Electric Boogaloo, which definitely earns its name now. Down in the dungeon again, we get another encounter with Kubia. Our attempts at Operation Orca fail again, because the 1-2 punch of Kubia's appearance and Elk actually abandoning his post off-screen. As a result, Leos' team of engineers from CC Corp are all wiped out by the cursed wave. As in, they are all put into comas. A huge group of them, all at once. Pretty bad times. Also a bad time? Remember when I said I wanted more fights like Kubia? Not what I meant. Did not want to have to do the same fight so many times. Twice was fine, but now we're at 3, and it keeps adding extra cores each time, making it even more of a slog. We're really not off to a great start on quarantine, I'll tell you what. So far, it's been a nasty grind and repeated bosses. At least Maka was narratively interesting, so I can appreciate that. Back to the net slum, we go over our problems and rally all of our friends like Moonstone and Rachel. You remember them, right? All the fun times we've had? Oh right, we skipped the side quest stuff. Well, they're replacing Leos' men and we're back to the fight. Which means Omega Cruel Vindictive Stars 3, this time it's personal. Yeah, really not a fan of having to repeat this dungeon for a 3rd time. I get that the dungeons are very samey anyway, and the RNG on what the portals will spawn means that no 2 trips into the same dungeon will be exactly the same. But like, there's hundreds, if not thousands, of keyword combinations that could have been the new location for the next crawl to at least add the facade of newness. With this 3rd dive into the same dungeon though, it completely removes any idea that we're traversing across the world to track down the location of the wave and its phases, or clues to uncover the mystery. Granted, at this point, we should understand the whole story, so it's simply a straight shot to the end. Anyway, here we do find Phase 7, Tarvos, the Avenger. And he at least makes this 3rd trip into the dungeon kinda worth it, for being incredibly visually unique, with a visage of a worm being stabbed in the head by a giant rusty nail. Also, the nail coming out of the main body in order to use Data Drain is the best use of the ability by any of these bosses since Skeeth. The utility of dropping into the ground to juggle damage resistances, like how Kubia's cores do, between attacks is also a fun touch. This is what I meant by I want more fights like Kubia, not simply Kubia copies. Regardless, we data drain, get the kill, and can move on. Finally to a new dungeon, or 5 new dungeons. Arriving at Net Slum, we're given 5 locations, the main stage for the final battle, and 4 separate dungeons we need to dive into in order to hunt down the final phase of the Cursed Wave. They're written on the board by the denizens of the Net Slum. We get Delta reincarnated Purgatorial Altar from Tartarga, the old man who kinda runs the Net Slum, to bring us to the final boss fight. But before we can do that, we need to head to Omega Splendid Emerald Nobleman, which we get from Jin, Omega Dreaming Moonlight Gravestone from Skunk, Omega Muted Starving Dryland from Kulwich, and finally Omega Rotting Countless Sacrifice from Doran. And here, we have the single most padded section of the game, because not only do we need to data drain a data bug in each of the 4 Omega server locations, but each of these locations is a protected area itself, meaning that we need to hunt down a bunch of data cores. The most egregious of which being that we need 9 data core Js, the ones that I mentioned before that are difficult to find, since the late game dungeons don't bother to spawn enough small enemies. So, we grind, kill the data bugs, and can finally head off to the finale. Delta Reincarnated Purgatorial Altar. This gives us a meeting with Harold, or at least a massive stone with part of Harold in it, who gives us the final piece of the narrative that we need to put the story of this game together. Although we are still missing a few pieces that were better explained in the anime and the OVA. We'll dive into it deeper after the final boss, but for now, we talk to Harold gets destroyed, and we have our final fight with Kubia. Not the final boss, by the way. This fight is like all the other Kubia fights, but we need to fight even more cores than before, and even his attempts to rile up Holy War cannot stop us from taking him down. Granted, the only way for us to take him down is to listen to what Aura had said about Kubia's true nature. He is the darkness cast on the world when the light of the bracelet formed on Kite's wrist. So to truly destroy Kubia, Kite and Black Rose need to destroy the bracelet. It works, Kubia is destroyed before he can cause any more harm, and its own infection can spread. And we head back to the net slot. We don't have the data drain anymore because the bracelet was destroyed, but we can still attempt the final boss. Phase 8, Korbanik, the Rebirth. While most of the phase bosses have been 2-phase fights already, Korbanik is unique in having 3 phases. There's also a lengthy and interesting cutscene right at the end. As for the fight itself though, it's more of the same. And the same strategies that worked on the last 7 phases of the Cursed Wave work on this final one as well. The third phase of Phase 8 is a little more unique with 3 orbs that it summons that have various effects if they aren't killed right away. Then again, not fully unique, as Kubia did the same thing with the core splitting into multiple little versions of itself that attacked the player and healed the boss periodically if not taken care of. The cutscene though is pretty incredible. Not only because of the way that it steals from Kingdom Hearts 3 20 years before that game even came out, by having Korbanik systematically data drain everyone important to Kite, leaving him alone to resolve himself for the final showdown, but also because it simply has the best animation and cinematography of the entire series. Like, look at this shit and tell me that ain't cool.
I won't.
I'm not giving up!
Oh, and Aura steps in to take the final hit for Korbanik, before fusing with the AI inside of it in order to stop the entire cascade from destroying the internet and continuing the data-draining comas. And now, we've won, and get to celebrate with all of our friends who are now alive and well. Everyone is out of their coma, and we walk into the new dawn of the world. 2 post-game events now. First is the return of the bracelet. Aura meets us in the dungeon where we first met her, and she gives Kite a new Book of Twilight, Daybreak, which gives us access to data drain again. Second, we get to dive into Omega Merciless Abyss's Drift. This is the hardest dungeon in the game. 15 floors with databug enemies in almost every room. It's not only a drain on resources, but also a drain on the bracelet itself, because if you let the infection spread too far, it will auto-kill the party. Here, we get a look at a familiar cat character, Maha from Dot Hack Sign. A purple cat named Maha, huh? Anyway, Elk wants us to go investigate, so we take Helba, who is broken powerful, and basically beats this dungeon on her own, and we find Maha at the end. Here, we also find the Dawn Wanderer, the guardian that protected Tsukasa in Sign. After fighting the Wanderer, it fuses with Maha, and we then have to fight Temptress Lover. Beating this revives Mia to her former self, the version from before we ever got the bracelet. So she still remembers Elk, but doesn't seem to remember us. So with all of that finished, it feels like we've got some explaining to do. While the story could go all the way back to Pluto's Kiss in 2005, which was a catalyst for the development of Ultimate and the release of The World, but the important movers here really don't start until The World is actually created. The talented German programmer Harold Horwick develops an immersive game, The World, with the help of his colleague Emma Weiland. However, while Emma was writing the Epitaph of Twilight and publishing it online, she tragically died in a car accident. It isn't entirely clear if Emma's death is caused by Pluto's Kiss, though it is implied to have happened before the first network event. But it is clear that the network damage had destroyed much of the work she'd done on the Epitaph of Twilight, and after years of duplications and alteration, the original work would get so twisted that while 70% of the original epic poem survived the network event, it's impossible to tell how much of the remaining work is Emma's original prose. Still, Harold would use the epitaph as the basis for The World. During that development, Harold would channel his grief into a new purpose for The World, creating an overarching AI system known as Morgana, based on a character from the Epitaph of Twilight, and it would collect player data. the interior of their minds type of data, as in the imprints of their personality that they leave behind when they interact with the system, the outside soul part that is drawn to the inside. This AI would then use that data to construct an artificial person, who would be like a daughter for Harold, as he had wanted to have with Emma. Still really weird that they weren't married and she wasn't in love with him. Kinda puts a damper on the tragedy of his lost love. He kinda comes off as a guy who couldn't let his pining for someone who didn't reciprocate his feelings go, and lost himself in grief when she died before he could come to terms with the fact that they were never going to be together anyway. This artificial person is Aura, the ultimate AI being. The only problem with this setup is that Harold gave Morgana only this one singular purpose and a self-preservation instinct, which conflict with each other, as Morgana comes to the conclusion that the completion and birth of Aura would mean the end of Morgana's task, and therefore the end of her life. So in order to continue her own existence, Morgana made multiple attempts to stop the birth of Aura. In .hex sign, this means putting Tsukasa in a coma, entrapping their mind in the world, attempting to draw from the real-life person's past traumas in order to infect Aura with negative emotions that would stop her from awakening. As the anime ends with this plan failing, Morgana attempts a secondary tactic, one that we see the start of in .hex sign as Morgana summons Skaith to attack some of the characters in the anime. That's actually how Sora winds up being trapped in the wand, before Kite eventually freed him in Outbreak. As for the IMOQ storyline, this takes place after Aura has already awakened and Morgana has taken the form of the Cursed Wave, infusing herself within all aspects of the world at once and sending her phases to hunt down Aura and shatter her with data drains. During this infighting from Morgana, some players have been getting caught in the crossfire and falling into comas, similar to Tsukasa and Sora. This is what is happening at the start of the game when Orca and Kite first meet Aura, and why when we finally find her in the end of Infection, Skeith data drains her and scatters her fragments, or segments, which we spend the remaining 3 games collecting. When we kill Skeith, we also kill a small part of Morgana, as she had placed a part of herself into each of the 8 phases, which is why killing the 8th at the end should have killed her too. In response to our killing of Skeith, Morgana creates Kubia from the data of the bracelet to confront us and keep us away from Aura, stopping us from putting her back together. Then, the majority of the game series is uncovering this past about the Epitaph of Twilight, and the segments that Morgana has pulled from in order to become the 8 phases and the Cursed Wave, as well as understanding who Harold was and what his plans were when creating Aura and Morgana. Finally, at the end, once we've gone through all of the trouble of connecting with all of our friends and fighting off the Cursed Wave until we fight Korbanik, the final piece of Morgana, there Aura sacrifices herself, allowing herself to be killed by Kite in order to fuse herself with Morgana. This is what we see when the red soul of Aura fuses with the blue soul of Morgana in Korbanik in order to finally make a fully completed version, the golden soul that we see break out of the Korbanik eye and fades into the world to watch over the virtual universe. And now we can move on to the final episode of Liminality, which gives us some of the information we got here for Harold and Morgana's motivations and actions. Basically, this episode is mostly a comedic espionage outing as Tokuoka, Mai, Yuki, and Kyo all work together with Sato in order to save the servers from being deleted by CC Corp, and get a copy of the data that will help them bring the company to court. While they're there, Mai logs into the game and sees the fighting happening at the end of quarantine, including when Tomonari and his character Sieg and the other coma victims are brought back to fight against Korbanik. In the end, the ultimate AI is confirmed to have been completed with the fusion of Aura and Morgana, and they leave the rest to those fighting on the inside to set everything right with the coma victims. Alright, Mia. What happened there? Well, first off, Mia isn't a real person. She is a data character who only exists in the world. While we originally thought she was a hacker who altered her character to look like a cat, this turned out to not be the case. As we see with the boss fight, Mia is Maha, who also appeared in .hack Sign in that smaller cat form that we see in the final post-game dungeon. But as the smaller cat form, Maha had grown an affection for Tsukasa and refused to follow Morgana's orders to keep them trapped anymore. So after becoming Mia, she then started to spend time with Elk because of his character's resemblance to Tsukasa. However, since she was also a part of Morgana, our efforts to destroy the 8 phases was slowly breaking her the same way that it was breaking Morgana and creating the new network surge that eventually became Pluto again. We even got to see this degradation happen over time very slowly, starting with Mia losing her ability to speak, then her forgetting that she'd already pranked Pyros, and finally the off her meds vibe from Outbreak. In the post-game dungeon, we then re-kill the original Maha and the Guardian from .hack Sign in order to rebirth Mia from before her degradation started, which was actually the moment Kite received his bracelet, which is why she remembers Elk but doesn't remember Kite. So now it's up to Elk to help Mia as she finds her place in the world now that she's been unshackled from Morgana. Maybe she can even get her memories back. And welcome back, Spoilerverse folks. So, there is a reason why the .hack GU series has seen a remaster on modern consoles, but the original 4 games never did. It's because these original 4 games simply don't hold up as a need-to-play retro classic the same way. The combat and dungeon crawling are incredibly simple and repetitive, with the benefits of rampant capitalism being the most powerful force in the entire series. At $40 to $50 per volume over the course of a year at the time of release, playing the entire series in 2001 cost upwards of $200. For a roughly 60-hour one-note experience that doesn't have turn-based strategy as good as RPGs of the time like Final Fantasy X or Shadow Hearts, doesn't have action combat as good as Kingdom Hearts or Devil May Cry, and doesn't have dungeon crawling as good as Dark Cloud or Kingsfield 4, all of which released around the same time for the PS2. It's an overpriced dive into a game that cost 4 times as much to deliver half the game that so many contemporaries could also give at the time. So clearly, I hated this experience, right? No. The trip from infection to quarantine is an incredible experience that I would absolutely suggest for fans of RPGs or dungeon crawlers now, and was an incredibly ambitious project back in 2001. Releasing over the course of the year, offering a new piece of the puzzle every few months was an amazing experience for the part that I was there for. And while better games have certainly released over the last 20 years, I'm ecstatic to finally be able to cross this off my list, after such a long wait to finally get some closure. So yeah, if you have the patience for some repetitive but ultimately fun dungeon crawling, an appetite for a 2000s anime storyline presented over the course of 4 volumes, and a passing fascination with the .hack series, I couldn't recommend giving these games a chance more. Honestly, one of the best experiences I've had for this channel in 2 years of uploads. Hey, it's that time again. The end of the video where I invite folks to come check out the Patreon, link in the description, and make good on the rewards for those currently pledged. Patreon members get early access to new content and their names written in the credits at the end of videos. And those who pledge in the top tiers get their names read out, like our DevBox designers, Genghis Braun, and our DevBox developers, Azul. Thanks for your support, and thanks for watching.